The big quit, the great resignation, whatever you want to call it, the bottom line is clear. Workers have been leaving their jobs in droves since the start of the pandemic, both by choice and by circumstance. But as Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author Farah Stockman highlights, that kind of dramatic change, especially when it's forced on a worker, can shake the very foundation of who they are. And that's been a reality for many since long before COVID-19. American Made, What Happens to People When Work Disappears, follows three people in Indiana who lost their longtime jobs in their factory, the Rexnord manufacturing plant, relocated to Mexico. You may remember the company from when Donald Trump publicly called it out during his 2016 campaign for, quote, rather viciously firing all of its 300 workers, then declaring this is happening all over our country. No more. But move they did, ending careers, deeply changing hundreds of lives in the process. Farah Stockman is a member of the New York Times editorial board, formerly of the Boston Globe, of course, and she joins me now. Congratulations, Farah. The thing is just totally great.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me and for reading it.
Well, my pleasure. You tell the story of Shannon Mulcahy, John Feltner, Wally Hall, and I feel like I know them personally. You tell the lives of just ordinary people who are extraordinary. Can you give us brief bios of these three?
Yeah. Let me just take a step back and say that I started this book on election night, essentially, of 2016, because I was stunned that so many Americans had voted for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in the Rust Belt. And when I started asking around about, okay, why Trump, people kept saying, he's going to save my job. He's going to bring the factories back. And so that's how I ended up following this plant in Indiana for about 7 months as it shut down and moved to Mexico, to really understand, like, what does that feel like? To be told that your job is going away because these people over here are going to do it cheaper. So I followed Shannon, who was this, she had been in an abusive relationship and was able to leave a violent man because of her job in this factory. And she works her way up from janitor up to becoming the heat treat operator at this plant, which was one of the most dangerous and highly paid jobs. She was the first woman ever to operate the furnaces there. I also followed Wally Hall, who was a Black man who had served a stint in prison, and he was able to get his life back on track because of a job in a factory. And after the factory closed, he really wanted, he was one of the most optimistic people I'd ever met. He wanted to start a barbecue business, and I really wanted to follow him to see if he actually did it. And the last person I followed was John Feltner, who was the union vice president, this white man, diehard union guy, grandson of coal miners. And I followed him to see where does he find a place in the world after this factory closes.
You know, whenever I read about a plant moving through the years, I always wondered not about how those workers felt about their boss, but how they felt about the workers who were replacing them. And in this case, it's on steroids, because these workers had to train the workers who'd be replacing them in Mexico. Yeah. There wasn't a monolithic response at all, was there?
Right. So John, the diehard union guy, went through the plant saying, okay, let's stand together as a union and refuse to train our replacements. There was a sense that if they did that, they could hurt the company. Maybe they could, buy some time. And the Black workers were kind of like, many of them thought that was racism, not to train the Mexicans, to refuse to train the Mexicans. A lot of the earliest people to raise their hands to train were Black workers who said, look, we're not going to stop the plant from moving. We might as well get this bonus. And a lot of the women too remembered that it had not been that long ago when the white men in the plant had refused to train them. And so it was really like their different identities made it hard for the union to stand strong and united as this plant was closing.
You know, one of the reasons I couldn't put the book down, besides how interesting these threesome were, is because obviously, like everybody else, I wanted to know what happened to them. And I'm going to let people buy the book and find out that. But I found most interesting, one of the most interesting things is you in this book. I mean, you introduce the reader to you right away as the privileged kid of two tenured college professors. You're a Harvard kid. I assume most local people know a little bit about you. Forget how their lives were changed by all this. How has your life changed by years of interaction with them and all this?
It was a huge education for me. It was a huge education. My mother grew up in Jim Crow, Mississippi. My mother's a Black woman from the South. And so I was very familiar with the racial barriers that still exist in this country and the disparities that are still unacceptable in this country. But I had never really grappled with the class issue. We kind of pretend in America that class doesn't exist, but it sure does. And it was a big realization to me that most decisions in this country are made by people with college degrees, even law degrees, and that yet we are a minority. We represent only a third of American adults. 2/3 of American adults don't have a BA. And so to me, you could just see how the laws and policies that, even well-intentioned that are supposed to be helping the working class, they don't always, it's not always what these working people want.
Do you think their perspective as a threesome, and I know there are three very different characters and individuals in the book, do you think their perspective of the child of two tenured professors who's an Ivy League graduate changed through their relationship with you?
I don't know. I remember Shannon telling me once, like, I wonder what my life would have been like if my parents had been like your parents. She grew up in a trailer park. She had suffered abuse from her stepfather. She just had, every terrible thing. And she's almost exactly the same age as me. And so it was so easy to see, like, okay, I was going off to college. She was trying to figure out how to make ends meet. Okay, I was hired at the Boston Globe. She was hired at this factory as a janitor. I'm at the New York Times now. Her job is going away. And so it was really easy to sort of look and see how, grapple with my own educational privilege.
We only have 30 seconds left. My major takeaway from this book is the paycheck is probably the least important thing that workers take away from their jobs. Was that yours?
Absolutely. I mean, this work was to them, the factory job was a fraternity. It was a family heirloom. It was a status symbol. And so it's easy to see how, the loss of that identity can really upend our politics.
You tell the story beautifully. It's a really important book. Congratulations. And I urge everybody to pick it up. It's good to see you, Farah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.